We continue this year, the Arizal, the story of Rav Nosson's trip to Eretz Yisrael. This story, by the way, is a shear in Torah. Arizal stresses that of all the Torah, of all the phases of Torah that a person can study, the deepest, the most precious, the holiest, is that which deals with Sipuri Mesias of tzadikim. Because this is what can arouse a person's neshama to much greater heights and accomplishments, B'Kedusha. Rav Nosson had reached the city of Tzefas finally. He got there on Thursday. He was given a very warm welcome. And then on Friday, Erev Shabbos, Rav Nosson began to visit the Mekaymis Akdoshim. Nosson tells that on Friday he went to the kever, first the tzin of the Arizal, and he tells that next to the Arizal there are two other quorum that look similar to it. The kever of the Ramak, Samesha Kodavida, one of the Bali Kabbalah, the Makzal, and the Shlomo Yalkovitz, the Mechaber Av L'Chodedi. Those who have been to Tzfas, remember that the Arizal Tzion is one of three. The Arizal is the furthermost Tzion of three that lie parallel to each other. And adjacent to each other you have these three Tziyonim, and that is usually the first ones that a person visits when he goes to Tzfas. From there, the Nosson went down to the cave of the Beis Yosef and the Al-Shech Zal. Beis Yosef, the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch, the Al-Shech Zal, who was the first Rebbe of Chaim Vital Zal, before he became a Talmud Arizal. Well, that too, I believe most or everyone here has been to Eretz Yisrael, to Tzfas. You recall that going from the Arizal downhill for quite a walk, you get down to the cave of Beis Yosef. But before that, we come to just a few feet down below the Arizal Tzion. Is the Tzion of Shimon Zal, Rabbeinu Zal's Talmud, is Mishamish B'Kodesh. Of course, at that time, Rabbi Shimon Zal was not in Eretz Yisrael. That's why we find that Nosson Zal's trek went from the Arizal right to the Beis Yosef. Nosson Zal was very happy, overjoyed at this Sichos, being that there the first time, being zecher to get to these Syrian Magdashim. This was an indescribable simcha. This was on Friday afternoon. On Friday evening, that is Friday night, at the meal in Tzfas, sitting among the Gedolei Tzadikim in Tzfas, and on Shabbos Kodesh in the morning, Rav Nosson told to the assembled people the story of Rabbeinu Zal's trip to Eretz Yisrael. He also spoke Divrei Torah, words of Rabbeinu Zal, and he was very happy again at this Sichos that he was zecher to get to Eretz Yisrael and there to spread the words of wisdom of Torah Rabbeinu Zal. This was during the Shabbos morning meal. At Shalosh Shudas, the third meal, as is customary, Rav Nosson was invited to speak, and there Rav Nosson tells that he spoke the Torah of Likutei Moharan, Torah Reish Pei Beis, chapter 282 of Likutei Moharan, which Rav Nosson himself states is, in his opinion, the most important Torah of the entire Likutei Moharan. Now, the fact that he spoke of this Torah there is something that is so remarkable that we should take note of this very carefully. What does the Torah say? This is something that everybody has learned himself, has heard time and time again. And yet, each time you hear it, it is made to inject into a person's heart and neshama a new feeling, a rejuvenation. The Torah is based on a posek, Hazamna Elokai B'Odi. Just one word, and then we'll see this remarkable point. Hazamna Elokai B'Odi, the Arizal says that every person has within him a guilt complex. A person who is honest with himself. He feels guilty. He feels that he did not fulfill his mission, his duty, his responsibility to Hashem. In the Torah we find mitzvahs. Each one of the mitzvahs has the word chayev. A person is chayev lioniach tefillin. He's chayev b'tein staka. He's chayev to do these mitzvahs. Chayev means one who is in debt. He owes a debt. He owes his debt to Hashem, He is not free until he pays off this debt. So each person has a debt to fulfill these mitzvahs. The person who does not fulfill it means that he still is in debt, and he's shirking his duty to pay to Hashem this debt. Now, a person feels this guilt complex that he has not paid the debt properly. When he came to putting on tefillin, he did not do it with the right kavanah. When he came to davening, he had his mind on something else. When he came to giving tzedakah, giving meiser and tzedakah, he knows in his mind that he earned more than he gave. He earned more than he gave less than 10% of his true earnings. He tried to hide within himself. He tried to cover in his own mind a certain amount that he still feels guilty of not having paid up. Or he feels guilty in that he did not help another Jew where he could have. He did not give up himself for the sake of others. So when a person begins to study himself carefully, he finds that he is a Rasha. Rasha means he is guilty, he's evil. The person begins to look at himself with disdain and with a feeling of despondency, as though he himself is lost. What chance do I have of coming close to Hashem if there's nothing that I do properly? There's nothing that I do good. The only thing I do good is I eat well, I enjoy myself well, physically I'm perfect. When it comes to the ruchnius, then I let myself down completely, and I know that my actions are very not fitting for a Jew. So actually I find nothing good in myself at all, therefore I consider myself lost. There's no hope for me whatsoever. Arizal says this is the attitude of many Jews who mean well, who are honest at heart, and they mean well by this, and with this they fall into yish. Arizal says, what is the answer for this? What is the solution? The solution is that, again, study yourself. And look into these same mitzvahs that you've done. I davened without kavanah. Bad, very bad, failed. When I davened Shemon Esrei, my mind was on different things, very bad. I rushed through the davening. I rushed through without kavanah, putting on tefillin. I got through and I ran. But there is something good. There's a tiny drop, a little dot, a little light in all this darkness. I did take time out. I could have gone to business earlier, and I spent time, a few minutes, to go to shul and daven. True, it was a very weak davening. But there's one good point there. There's something that still was good. Or I recall that a certain line in the davening, I sort of poured out my heart right there. I felt slachlonim. I said the words with more kavanah than usual. There's a little dot there. There's a mi'at. Oid mi'at. Still a tiny drop where it wasn't bad. There's a posek in Tehillim. The Melech says, "V'oid mi'at v'ein rasha, v'hispainanta al mekaymai v'einenu." V'oid mi'at, a little drop more, that little tiny dot, v'ein rasha, and there's no rasha. What does that mean? That in all this evil, there's a little mi'at. This oid mi'at, still a bit. V'ein rasha, and there's no evil in that point. Look at your place now, where you are. You're not there anymore. You've raised yourself to a higher level because you were done lekavskos. You judge yourself to the benefit, to the good. Why? Because of that oid miyat. This oid that a person has, which means a little dot, a drop of good, that little bit of good, so tiny, could help to elevate a person to the highest madrega. You can judge yourself for the good. This, of course, Arizal says, applies to judging others too. You see a person who's bad, and you just discard him. Discard any chances of trying to bring him closer, trying to help him. That's an evil act. Look for the good in each person. Search out a drop of good, the oid mi'at, where that person is not bad, and you'll find he's no longer on this low madrega you thought he was. This includes yourself too. This, Arizal says, is the translation of the words Azamra lalikai bi'odi. Azamra lalikai, I will sing. How can a person sing when he feels so badly, when he feels so despondent and so heartbroken, so low? But the oidi, with that oid mi'at that I have, that oid, Azamra lalikai, I'll sing forth in happiness, bi'odi, with my oid mi'at. And this is what will raise a person, help a person to serve Hashem, because once he drops this atzmos, this sadness, this low feeling, he's up high. Very good. This is a wonderful statement, naturally. Let's study the statement ourselves, and we'll find that to us, this is a ray of hope in a dark world. Here we thought we were finished, we were wiped out. What good are we compared to tzaddikim? We are nothing. Our davening, our learning, our living is zero compared to good tzaddikim. I'm speaking about myself. So what chance do we have? What chance do we have in serving Hashem if our lives are so poor, impoverished spiritually? The answer is, Rabbi Arizal gave us the key. Rabbi Arizal said, do not despair, because every Jew has this oid mi'at. And because of this oid mi'at, then you're no longer a low person, you're high. Raise yourself with this oid mi'at and sing to Hashem a song of praise and happiness. Good. This we see is wonderful for us. If not for this statement, we'd be lost. R Nosson says, all the Torah's teachings of Rabbi Arizal, this was, he felt, was the greatest and most important lesson. But we can understand ourselves saying that. We can understand that. For tzaddikim, what have they got to worry about the oid mi'at? They're complete, they're perfect. They haven't got oid mi'at that's good. They are cool on tov, completely perfect. What do they need this little drop of good to change from a rasha to a tzaddik? There's no evil within them at all. So why then, two questions. Why did R Nosson himself say about himself, I feel that the best Torah that I have learned is this Torah, and this is the most important Torah that I have seen, ever heard yet, spiritually. R Nosson, who was so pure, who was a tzadik, kodesh, tomim, Torah, needed this oid mi'at. The answer is that we do not know tzaddikim. We do not realize that this is the greatness of tzaddikim. Tikuney is their amisanusam. Their anivas is so pure that if you think that you consider yourself low, that you need the oid mi'at, you have no idea what they think, these tzaddikim. To them, they grasp at this assistance, this help in ruchnius as a lifeline, as oxygen, life itself. This, therefore, Nosson, knowing this, gave this shear to the tzaddikim living in Arizal, who lived in the holy city of Tzfas, who lived and breathed kedusha constantly. And to them, this was giving them a new life. So that this Torah applies to everyone, no matter how low a person is, no matter how great or how high a person is. This Torah, is a chiyus, a life that's injected into a Jewish neshama. That's why Nosson felt that at Shalosh Shudas, which is known as Mok Nizman and Aivod and Ivan, the holiest time of the Shabbos, holiest time of the week, of the year. At that moment they give, the Torah considered the holiest and most important of all. This was the Shabbos afternoon. On the next day, on Sunday, Nosson again went to visit the Menachem Mendel. He went first to the kever of Hosea ben Be'eri, Navi Hosea, and to the kever of Hosea Navi's father, Be'eri himself. He also visited the kever of the Yenuka, which Rabbi Arizal revealed the fact that a person may visit there. People were afraid to visit because of fear of a poisonous snake. Rabbi Arizal was the first one to enter into that cave, and this paved the way, opened the door for others to come to visit. Nosson also visited the kever in Tzfas of Rabbi Arizal's daughter, her husband, and her son. All three are buried together on that same cemetery. Nosson visited there. He felt it his duty, of course, to visit Rabbi Arizal's family who are buried there. And then, going still further down, he came to the tzion of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoel. It's the last tzion in the old cemetery. In fact, between that now they have new graves. That's the circle of fallen rocks. There, he went to the mikveh of the Arizal. Note, the mikveh is an old mikveh. There's a certain good feeling knowing that person is zecher to go to that mikveh, The Menachem Mendel Schneerson himself was there too, not too long ago, so a little over 100 years ago. But the idea that this mikveh has been frequented by the greatest tzaddikim, the Arizal himself, naturally. And the power of this mikveh, the kedusha of that mikveh, as is known, as is claimed, what it can do for the neshama of a person eternally. Moses went to this mikveh, and with that he culminated that day's visits. On the second day, that is on Monday, Moses went to the cave of Rabbi Chutzpis HaMeturgamon, who was one of the Asedes Hanugei Malchus, one of the 10 rabbis who were killed by the Roman king. And the cave of Rabbi Yehoyada HaKohen, that was on Monday. On Tuesday, Moses went in the morning to visit Miron. Now from Tzefas to Miron, as everyone should know, experienced this, it's approximately 9 kilometers, or about a little less than 5.5 miles. This 5.5 miles takes approximately 10 minutes. Now, the average traveling time, not going too fast, takes 10 minutes from Tzfas to Miron. 10 minutes or less today. Of course, there is a winding road, so actually the distance is less than that if you take a straight line. Those days, Nosson traveled by mule. And the distance, this short distance, he left Tzfas in the morning and got to Miron just before noon, which means a good few hours for a trip that is so comparatively short. And then, of course, Nosson visited the most important, the cave of Rabbi Shimon Yechoyzal, was of Rabbi Shimon, above the top of the hill of Yochanan Sandlar, Beis Hillel and his Talmidim. Nosson mentions the fact that Hillel HaZokein is buried inside, more in the inner recess of that cave. And then Nosson says he visited Rabbi Yitzchak in the entrance of Rabbi Shimon Yechoyzal's chotzer, the yard. Entering Rabbi Shimon Yechoyzal's Siyar, there's a yard there. On the right side you have the Siyar Mark Rabbi Yitzchak. It's a Mavchel. Nosson writes that he visited that Siyar Rabbi Yitzchak. Now, we once spoke about this. It's worth mentioning again, because this, too, is the main part of the story, showing the moral lesson we can learn. Nosson writes, very simply, he visited Rabbi Yitzchak Tzion, which is in the yard of Rabbi Shimon Yechoyzal's Me'odah, the cave. A straight statement like that, when the Arizal says befedish in his writings that the Haman Am, the people, of course this is Rav Shmuel Talzal who writes this, commenting on the Arizal's words, the Haman Am, the average people, make a very serious mistake because they think that Yitzchak Nafcha is buried in the cave of Rav Shimon Yechoyzal. This is a serious mistake. Arizal himself, at one time, spent time, he had the power of going to these graves. With his eyes, he could see the neshama, the nefesh that was buried there. He could see it and talk to it also. So there was no way there could be any mistake, chas v'shalom. Arizal was able to see every single neshama. He could see them standing over the grave, talk to them, converse with them. He wrote down, he charted this map, exactly where each one of these tzaddikim, these tanoim, were buried. This, Reb Chaim Talzal wrote then a sefer showing, directing a person how to reach every one of these kvarim. Nowadays, of course, we have the Ministry of Tourism has put up signs in Israel with arrows showing where the kvarim, the kaimis of these tanoim are. In those days, they didn't have the Ministry of Tourism. Arizal himself went and made certain exactly where each tana was. So there was no way that there could be an error there. Well, that Shmuel Talzal writes, the Hamayim, the average person, erroneously has gotten into his mind that in a courtyard, forefront of Rav Shimon Yechoyzal's cave, there is buried a Yitzchak. And this is an error because his actual burial place that Arizal pointed out was much further away in Tzfas. And yet, Rabbi Nosson, who was undoubtedly the greatest Baki in his time, in all of the phases of Teda, especially the Sifrei Kabbalah, the writings of Arizal, Kisvei Arizal, we see from his own Sefer he wrote, Sforim. Surely having read this, Rav Zohar writes very blandly, very calmly, he visited the cave of Rabbi Yitzchak, the grave of Rabbi Yitzchak, in the courtyard of the Shemi Yechoizah, which would strike us as very strange. We explained that it is not the issue of who is buried there. Certainly there is a Tana that is a holy tziyun. Rav Zohar writes it was Rabbi Yitzchak because to show that if the Hamoin Am, if the ordinary person says Rabbi Yitzchak is buried there, Rav Zohar said, I will not show myself to be superior to them with my knowledge of the Arizal. I am one of the Hamoin Am. I am that simple and that low. I state also Rabbi Yitzchak. If there is an error, let me be part of the Hamoin, part of the Tzibur in the same error. This was the Anivus, the Tahara, the purity of Rav Zohar. On the way back to Tzfas, Rav Zohar visited the cave of Rabbi Yonah ben Yefes, Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Loi. If you recall, this is just a few minutes on the way. It's on the road, in fact, the paved road we have today. This is right at the side of the road. Rabbi Loi and Rabbi Loi, his father. Also, there is buried Rabbi Chris Bedoi and his mother. Rav Zohar says he was not zecher to visit this scene, which he regretted, but for some reason he could not get to the scene at this time. Probably there wasn't enough time to visit it, because Bedoi is the one mentioned in the Zayra Kodesh, one that the Shulchan Aruch and his Talmud went to visit, whose home he went to visit after his stalkers. And on the way to Minon too, also he visited the B'Yesi de B'Yekes. This was all on Tuesday, this trip to Minon. On Thursday, Rav Zohar set out to Tveria. He set out in the morning. Again, remember this ride is approximately a little less than an hour today. And it is an hour when it should be really no more than about 20 minutes. It's just that the roads are so winding, it's at least 3 times the distance. If there was a straight road, it would take 1/3 of the time. Going by mule, they would avoid this winding road. You could climb the mountains better than a car could. So the trip took from morning until evening. It was a whole day's trip. Rav Zohar got there. Again, there were people awaiting him. He was given a semi-royal welcome. They were aware of the fact that he was coming, that he had arrived, and of course his name had spread. The people there were zecher to know little of his greatness. Of course, we stressed the fact Rav Zohar came there, and each one that he visited, he regarded as one superior to himself. One of zecher v'yinayt Yisrael, as a person, an ordinary person should. Rav Zohar acted like an ordinary person. The next day on Friday, Erev Shabbos Kodesh, Rav Zohar went to visit the Beis HaKvodes in Tveria, what is known today as the old Beis HaKvodes. And then he visited the cave of Rabbi Nachman Hori Denker. That's Rabbi Arizal's grandfather. Rabbi Arizal was Rabbi Nachman ben Simcha. His father's father was Rabbi Nachman Hori Denker, who was one of the Talmidim of the Baal Shem Kodesh. In fact, there's a whole story about how there was an attempt at a shidduch made between the Arizal, Baal Shem Tov, and Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Shidduch which did not work out for some reason. Menachem Mendel was a very close, very loyal Talmud of Baal Shem Kodesh. There also he visited the grave of Mendel Vitebska Zal and Rabbi Aharon Kaliska Zal. Rabbi Aharon Kaliska Zal, you recall, was the tzadik when Rabbi Arizal had met in Eretz Yisrael not too long prior to this trip, and Rabbi Arizal said about Rabbi Arizal said that he is the one person he has met who had shleimus, complete tzadik. Also the cave of the Shipativkidov and other tzadikim, which Nosson does not enumerate. The cave of Rav Kana and his Talmidim. Rav Kana was an Amayda of the Gemara, his Talmidim. And then the tziyun of Rameya Balanes. Then they went to the Chamei Tveria, the hot springs of Tiberia, and they bathed in these hot springs. So in case a person goes to Tiberia and doubt whether he should bathe in the hot springs of Tiberia, there is your heta. Nosson was there. It's kosher waters to bathe in. Of course, we just learned recently that the Chami Tiberia are the remains of the hot waters of the Mabul. The hot springs of the Mabul, this is one of those waters that remain. But they do have very curative powers, very powerful, therapeutically, they are excellent. The Kever of Rabibio, Nosson says, was known to have been buried in an upright position, standing. Now, it's interesting to note that Nosson says this. Again, a strange item to note. Bibio is buried standing. This is something that is passed down, the Kabbalah, from father to son. It is not clearly written about his being buried standing. It is written in Fedish that the Meir Balaness was buried standing, in upright position. This was not mentioned before. So again, there is a hidden reason for the Nosson making these statements. And of course, again, we'd say the hidden reason is the simple anivus of Nosson. And then he spent the Shabbos in Tiberia, and it was a very happy Shabbos, naturally. When Tzoi Shabbos Kodesh, Nosson was invited to a chasana. He was happy that he was there to be at a chasana in Eretz Yisrael. Those days, of course, a chasana in Eretz Yisrael was different than these days because it was those days. Nowadays, too, it's a big schus to be at a chasana in Yisrael, or anywhere to be at a chasana, especially if you're part of it yourself. On the next week, on Monday, still in Tevei, Nosson visited the Kever Tziyun of Rabbi Akiva and his 24,000 Talmidim. It is strange that just recently, just in a recent few years ago, the Kever of Rabbi Akiva was marked. Until about 4 or 5 years ago, there was no sign whatsoever on the Tziyun of Rabbi Akiva. On top of that tall mountain, there was a sort of an entrance to a tunnel, sort of, and there was no sign showing it, but those who knew this was the place where Rabbi Akiva was buried. Now, someone recently gave of his own, one of the Sephardim there, the Mishabeach Sephardi, he built, at his own expense, he built a beautiful tziyun with a dome, a closed dome. This really beautifies the tziyun because this can be seen from different parts of the city now. Rosenfeld says that this tziyun of Akiva was on top of the mountain, and below, along the side of the mountain, are buried all his 24,000 Talmidim. There are no markers there, but it is a fact. And the fact is that there's nothing built on that mountain. That should be sufficient proof. Also, Nosson says that opposite the Akiva's tziyun, though there's no marker till this day still, opposite his tziyun is buried Rabbi Akiva's wife. Now this obviously refers to Rabbi Akiva's first wife, Rachel, who was the sole inspiration to Rabbi Akiva. Akiva himself stated that everything he had, he owed to his wife, the one who helped him, inspired him to go study immediately after the wedding, who told him, leave me and go to the yeshiva to study. The reason I married you is that you should study till you should become a Talmud Chacham, a tzadik. Of course, it was to her credit that he became so great. When he returned, you recall the story that his Talmidim wanted to push her aside, and Akiva told her to beware because she is just as holy as he is, and the Torah that they learned and that he learned is due mainly to her credit. We see how women too can rise to such meteoric heights. The Akiva's wife was so great that we find rarely any tzaddikim in history compared to her height. This was on Monday. On Tuesday, Nosson visited the tziyun of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his Talmidim. Now, we cannot elaborate on this point, but what I do not say shall remain obvious. We just say what the Arizal says, and the rest is understood. There's an obvious point there. And also, next to his tzion, there is also a tzion of Rabbi Yochanan, Mora the Yad Yisrael. Also the tzion of Amid Avasi and the Shulchan Kodesh. And these are all, nearly all, everyone knows. Those who have been there know in this foreyard, the courtyard just off the street, you have Yochanan Zakkai and his Talmidim, Amid Avasi and the Shulchan Kodesh. But there is one tzion there that is not marked. To most people, it's a mystery today. Whose tzion is that? Rabbi Nachman says this is the tzion of Rabbi Yochanan, the chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael, who was the Rebbe of Rish Lakish. So this clears up a mystery, modern day mystery. Of course, you cannot tell it to others because this is a Breslover information. So at least we know the truth about whose tzion it is. In any event, this is all that Rosenfeld says for that day. Period. On Wednesday, the next day, Rosenfeld went to visit the kivurim of Noshim Tzidkonius. This again proves a very important point, that if a person is a tzadik, a person is a very holy tzadik, even if she is a woman, she is still regarded as a tzadik. This does not subtract from the fact that she is a tzadik. And here he went to visit these kivurim, same awesome, respectful attitude as the ones he'd gone to till now. The kivurim visited were those of Elisheva Bas Aminadov, the wife of Aharon HaKohen, Tzipora, the wife of Moshe Rabbeinu, Yocheved, the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu, Chuda Hananiah, Bilhah and Zilpah, the wives of Yaakov Avinu, Abigail, the wife of David HaMelech, and some say that there too is the grave of Esther HaMalka. There are some who dispute some of these names. There's machlekes about some of them only, but all admit that the majority of the names mentioned, at least the majority, are all buried there, so that it is certain that you have this grave site set aside for the Gedolei Noshim Tzidkonius in the world. Aside from, of course, the cave of four couples, Yasal Pela and Cave Aracha. This is the other place. This one is in Tiberia. All this was on Wednesday. Wednesday is the day of the Lavana, which is the Nukva. We went to visit these Sionim. On Thursday, again, we went back to visit the grave of Rav Kahana and his Talmidim. And on Friday, he went to the Mendel Schneerson, Zal, again to the Mei Balanes, and again to the waters of Tiberia, to bathe in the hot waters of Tiberia. This was the night of Shabbos. And then must have got to think about the fact that he has to think of going back. He's not settling here. And he was very, very short of funds. This began to press him very seriously. He could find no solution to this, because you cannot collect money from those who receive money. He was among the people in Eretz Yisrael who send out Mishalachim to collect tzedakah for them. As King David said, you have a ditch, a pit, a big hole. How do you fill up that hole? A hole means something lacking. How do you fill it up? You cannot take earth from that pit, take out dirt from that hole, and fill up the hole with that dirt. You must have something else from a side place to fill it up. Rosenfeld found himself in a quandary. How does he get money now? Expense money to return. He was concerned about this, and he had bitachon. Hashem would help. On Sunday, he was approached by a woman who told him that she wants to send money to her son in Chutz La'aretz, who lives near the Bnei. This, of course, is a very unusual switch. Women in Eretz Yisrael to send money to one living outside of Eretz Yisrael, very strange. In fact, even today would sound very strange. Money usually is channeled in one direction to Eretz Yisrael. This woman said she wants to send money to him, to her son. It might have been a case where she was very old, and she wanted to give her belongings to the son. She had her money lying invested in a pair of silver candelabras. And so she told him, I'll take this silver candelabra, take it with you on your way back to Alexandria. There, I allow you to sell this candelabra and bring the money to my son, which means that you can use this money for expenses then, lay it out for expense. When you get home, you take the money in your house and give it to my son, this woman said. This way, this was a solution to the Noson's financial problems. He's very happy about this Sichos. Hashem helped him to solve this problem. He now would have enough money for the trip. Next day, Noson's left. This was he stayed over Shabbos. This was on Sunday. On Monday, he left Tveria. And he got to Tzfas on Tuesday. It took a day to get back to Tzfas. In order to get, if you recall, to get to the port, Tveria is more to the east. And to go towards the west, the Mediterranean Sea. So from Tveria towards Tzfas, and from Tzfas to the port to Haifa. From Tzfas to Haifa today is approximately an hour and a half's ride. The Nosson went from Tveria to Tzfas on Tuesday, and on Wednesday he visited the cave of Rabbi Nachman. On Thursday he visited the cave of the Arizal, and he stayed there in Tzfas till after Shabbos. On Monday he began the cave of Rav Hoshea. On Tuesday he left Tzfas in order to his first leg of the journey to return home. And when he left Tzfas, practically the entire city joined together to be Malaved to accompany him on his way out. Very important to have this company, because this is supposed to save a person from any dangers on the journey. It's possible that the dangers that confronted him later, he was helped a lot by this large accompanying group, especially so many tzaddikim. He left Tzfas on Tuesday. He traveled the entire day, and on Wednesday he arrived in Haifa. It took him probably more than 24 hours to get to Haifa from Tzfas. An hour and a half journey by car today, and all that not on soft cushioned seats, but on the back of a mule. If you've ever tried it, you find that it's very difficult to go for an hour, especially those who was not used to, was not accustomed to riding on backs of mules. But he went, this is all done b'simcha, he accepted everything b'simcha because he was going in Eretz Yisrael. He arrived on Wednesday in Haifa, and on Thursday in Haifa he went to visit the Menachem Mendel there. He went to the Tziyun of the Yitzhak Nafcha. This is what it says in Haifa. We have an explanation for that. And Yimio the Min Haifa, mentioning Gemara. And he went to the Oras Eliyahu Navi. He came to Eliyahu Navi. And he came there together with a group of people. He was refused admittance to the cave. A very serious argument broke out. Nosson was the spokesman for the group, and he was very persuasive. He convinced the caretakers there to allow them all to enter into the cave of the Navi. He was very happy when he came in there. In the cave, they all danced and sang the Gunim, Simcha. They got to the cave of the Navi. Then they went to the cave of Elisha Navi. Nosson spent a week in the city of Haifa. Well, he was very happy that he was zecher to get to Haifa. What is special about Haifa? A person goes to Eretz Yisrael today, he goes directly from Yerushalmi to the Golan, the Kiruv Sakdashim, Tzfas, Tveria. Along those roads, very few visit Haifa for the Kiruv Sakdashim, except, of course, for the Oras Eliyahu Navi. Nosson was especially happy spending time in Haifa because to him, the value of Haifa was the fact that Rabbeinu Zal, when he arrived in Eretz Yisrael, arrived at Haifa. And he stayed in Haifa, not just for the time spent there. Rabbeinu Zal's main day is Rosh Hashanah. Rabbeinu Zal came there and stayed in Haifa on Rosh Hashanah, stayed there during the entire Seder Simei Tshuva, was there on Yom Kippur, and then the entire holiday of Sukkot was spent too in Haifa. Since that the place was that important, Rabbeinu Zal's arriving in Eretz Yisrael was of benefit to every single person in the world. This is an important point. People say this is beneficial to Rabbi Arizal's Talmidim, or to his followers, or to those who believe in it, later generations. Rabbi Arizal said that's a very false idea, misrepresentation of fact. Because the tzadik emes, even though he is hidden, even though his light is hidden and not seen, not recognized, the fact remains that every single neshama in the world nurses from the light of that tzadik emes. So Rabbi Arizal's light was increased manyfold, infinitely, by going to Eretz Yisrael. The 4 steps that he took in Eretz Yisrael were what elevated him to the position where he was so far above his madrega before, he was actually ashamed of what he had reached before Eretz Yisrael. When before this trip he was already the tzadik emes of the entire world, the entire universe. So getting to Eretz Yisrael, taking those 4 steps, affected the neshama of every single person in the world. In this case, we could say that this has its counterpart, resembles the story of Adam Harishon. The Gemara says that when Adam Harishon ate from the Eitz Hadas, every single neshama that exists was affected by this and lost by it. Each neshama has something, a defect, because of the Eitz Hadas, because of the eating of Eitz Hadas by Adam Harishon. This defect was suffered by every single neshama except certain limited few tzadikim. But in this case, by the same token, Rabbi Arizal is arriving in Eretz Yisrael, since the tzadik emes is koilel, he encompasses all the neshamas of the whole world. The Mela, his aliyah, affected every single neshama. So we believe that through Rabbi Arizal, a lot of that defect was removed. But that defect could be removed only if a person has the keli to receive this tikkun. And that keli is emunah. A person who is ma'amin can receive it. A person who is kafir excludes himself from this light, shuts out this light of the tzadik emes. Ashrei to those who are ma'amin. This is what the Nosson said. When he got there, he was so overjoyed. He was zecher to be in Eretz Yisrael and to be in that very same place where Rabbi Arizal was in Eretz Yisrael. But most important to be when Rabbi Arizal arrived in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Arizal took those first 4 steps where he achieved this great aliyah, the highest aliyah possible, in Haifa, close to the cave of the R. That's where the Nosson was zecher to arrive at. And therefore he spent an entire week there before leaving Eretz Yisrael, filled with the simcha, rejoicing over the fact that he was zecher to this aliyah too. This was his final 4th destination, from which he would leave for Chutz La'aretz. He now arranged very quickly for a ship, passage on board a ship for himself and his chaver. They got a ship which there were a number of Jews. In other words, they had at least an assurance that no matter how long the trip would take, they would have a minyan of people to daven every day. In addition, what turned out to be very fortunate, Nosson remembered to take along a shofar with him. So they set out from the city of Haifa on what they hoped would be a very short journey, but turned out to be, we might classify as a nightmare, and they balanced the rest of the adventures, Nosson's return to his home. We'll take this up in the next year. We hope to conclude this, Mitzvah Shem, the next year. And again we point out that through all the parts of this story, Tikuney Zohar, we find that the basis, the aside, is Emunah. Emunah in tzadik emes, which leads a person to true Emunah in Hashem and the Torah and to Chayim Nitzchiyim. We should be zecher to fulfill our duty, our chiyuv in this Emunah, and thereby rise to become closer in serving Hashem, and merit the seeing, becoming a Mashiach, the Beis Mikdash from Amen.